Hello and welcome to this Q&A with the Fertility Alliance. And today we are going to be talking to Andrea and we're going to be talking about MRKH. So Andrea, could you start by telling us what is it?
MRKH stands for Mayer-Rokitansky-Küster-Hauser, and it's a syndrome that affects 1 in 5,000 women. And that means that women are born without a uterus or with an underdeveloped uterus, and typically without the top third of the vagina. Often there's also other malformalities in the spine, kidneys, heart that can be coming along with it as well.
I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you discovered that you had it.
Yeah, so my journey to diagnosis was very similar to what other girls with MRKH go through, in the sense that I was born quite normally, so externally you couldn't see anything differently. So doctors didn't know that I was missing a uterus, and my parents didn't notice as well. Uh, and I was waiting for my periods to start when I was a teenager. So, my body started developing. I started having breasts and a waist like girls do. And I could see that my cousins who are my age started their periods around their 14, 15. And my colleagues at school also started their periods, talking about pads and all those exciting things that we go through. And I didn't have periods. So when I was 15, my parents took me to the doctor, and the doctor just said that some girls start a bit later in life. And so we waited another year. So by 16, again, we go to the doctor, and they say, well, some girls just start later in life. So we wait another year. And by 17, I think it was already a bit too late. So when we go to the doctor, they start doing a lot of investigations. But I think when doctors go through medical school, they're learning to think about the most likely scenario first. And I think MRKH being so rare, it's never front of their minds of what it could be. So the approach to diagnosis was a bit challenging. I had scans, ultrasound scans that said that I had a uterus. Now I know that ultrasound scan is not the best way to diagnose such a condition. And I wonder if they were looking at the bladder now. I don't know, but I have a couple of ultrasound scans that have that. When I did my blood tests, everything was normal because I do have ovaries, so of course all the hormonal fluctuations were normal. And the doctor said maybe you're just too skinny, and when women have low weight, the period doesn't come, so maybe put on some weight, which I did. Um, and yeah, that didn't trigger. Then the doctor said, maybe I'm going to give you the pill, because if I give you the pill, that will trigger a bleed. And it never did. So it was a lot of trial and error. And it was only when they tried something that, the way I see it now, was something quite basic, which was try a normal gynecological examination, that it was very, very painful. You know, as a teenage girl, I was, I had never been through that, but I was feeling like most women go to the gynecologist several times in their lifetimes. It's something normal. It should be okay. So there's nothing to be afraid of. But the process was quite painful for me. And she couldn't do the gynecological examination. So she told me to get dressed and sit. And she said, I think you don't have a uterus. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I want my mom. Because as a young girl, I was feeling so strong. I can go through this. This is a normal situation. But in that moment, everything changed. So my mom came into the room, and she was holding my baby sister in her arms at the time. She was just 1.5 years old. And the doctor said the same thing. I think Andrea doesn't have a uterus. She might need surgery to reconstruct her vagina. And the second thing that came out of my mouth was, well, does that mean that I can't have children? And she said, I don't think you will. And I kept asking the same question over and over again as if a different answer would come, and it never did. So she then referred me to the National Health Service, and the whole diagnosis process started again. So they didn't really take the private doctor's opinion into consideration, and several doctors tried again to do a gynecological examination in 3 or 4 occasions, very painful. Doctors not believing that um, I had something wrong with me, and they kept saying, "You're not letting yourself be examined. The pain is in your head." And I just remember as a young person just crying, and until the doctor suggested, if you don't let yourself be examined, we need to anesthetize you. And I said, that's fine. I just can't cope with the pain anymore. So when they anesthetized me, they've put a camera in my abdomen, and that's when they've noticed that the uterus wasn't there, and the vagina wasn't there. And that's when the words MRKH showed up on a piece of paper for the first time. So
Incredibly traumatic process. I mean, I wonder what impact did it have on your life as a young woman?
it's so I don't have the words to describe, because going into a gynecology ward, it's usually middle-aged older women there, and I was there as a young 17-year-old girl. Everyone was wondering what I was doing there. And when I see those words on a piece of paper, on one side I was happy I had an answer and I had a name for it. On the other side, the doctors were very excited because I was something rare and exciting that they don't see often. But they didn't have an answer on the way forward, and that in itself was very traumatic because I just wanted to be as normal as possible. And something that I could do to be normal was to reconstruct my vagina. And the doctors didn't know how to do that. Of course, the lack of uterus, I would never be able to resolve, but I was just wanting to be as normal as possible. So, as a young woman, I started researching online what surgeries or what options I had to reconstruct my vagina. And, this was a long time ago, like 25 years ago. So Google was not what it is now. There wasn't as much information as there is now. And there wasn't certainly Facebook and Instagram to connect with other people who had done it. So I just found as much information as I could. And eventually I found a very nice doctor who listened to me. He took the time to review every piece of information I had found. He talked to me about the pros and cons of each procedure, and together we've made a decision on the surgery that I was going to undergo. So I ended up having surgery in my first year of nursing school, which in itself is very challenging because as a young girl in university, most girls are worried about, it's exciting and you have new friends and you're going out and there's sorts of exciting things. And I was worried, thinking, am I really a woman? Am I good enough? How am I going to tell a potential boyfriend that I can't have children? Is it on the first date? On the second date? There's no rule book to do that. So it was incredibly challenging. And, I was going to hospital placements, often having to see, women give birth, women breastfeeding, being confronted with what I would never be able to have. And at the same time, wearing these vaginal prostheses for the first 6 months after surgery until everything was healed. So it was so challenging. But when I look back, I think when life presents these challenges to us, we find strength we didn't know we had. And I just move forwards with it.
It sounds as if you certainly did find strength and as if you had to do a lot of the research yourself. I mean, are the options for treatment better now, do you think? Do you think you would be treated differently now?
I think so. So when I moved to the UK, so I had there, in the UK, there's amazing teams that focus on MRKH. And they do follow up women with MRKH throughout their lifetime, which is amazing. So you have the doctor, the nurse, and the psychologist supporting you. Again, it itself, after I've been with MRKH for so long, I still had to convince my GP. I still had to have scans and MRIs to prove that I had what I was saying I had. But once I got there, I realized that the way they disclose the diagnosis in these specialized teams is much better, it's more appropriate. So they try to focus on the fact that even though you have that, there are options. You can adopt, you can do surrogacy, um, and now there's even uterus transplant. So I think trying to put a focus on there's a light at the end of the tunnel is important for clinical teams to do. Um, yeah, I think lots of things could have been different in my case, but I think we've learned along the way. And as healthcare professionals, I think they have that responsibility to learn as well how patients respond to those words, because those are the diagnosis is a time that sticks forever. We never end up forgetting that day.
We know that one of the things that often makes a big difference is kind of meeting other people and being able to share
Mm.
experiences who've gone through something similar. Did you manage to meet anyone else who had MRKH?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed, I was so curious to see if other people had the same issue I had. And I agreed with the journalist at the time to do a piece on TV about my surgery, but I had my face blurred because I was young, I was quite shy, and I wasn't sure if there was going to be any backlash or what the media would say. Um, but in the news, it ended up showing up on the 8 p.m. news, woman born without a vagina, those titles that are quite shocking. What I've learned from that, from putting myself out there, is that nothing bad really happened. Everyone was really, really supportive. And people from so many places reached out to the news channel to say, I have this problem too. Please connect me with her. Please connect me with her doctor. So I think that is incredibly valuable. And at the time, we didn't have um, social media or mobile phones the way we have now, but we were meeting up in coffee shops. I was writing a newsletter in Word, printing it, sending it through the normal post. Those things that we do now much more easily. We were doing it at the time because community matters a lot. It's like a sisterhood of people who just understand you 100%.
And are you more hopeful for options for the future for other people who are in the same situation as you?
I think so. Now that, uterus transplants are starting to be researched, I think that can be an option, hopefully in the future, with less risk to women who are really desperate and really want to consider that as an option. I think surrogacy, when I was diagnosed, wasn't allowed. So it wasn't even thinking that something that I was open to considering. So surrogacy is really important. Accessibility to assisted technology, those things matter a lot. So I am hopeful for the future and the young girls who are being diagnosed now.
Are there any networks for people to meet one another? I mean, do they exist?
Yeah, so the hospitals here in the UK, they organize meetups. So once or twice a year, that is really good, often with the patients, but often also with families, because it's really important that our parents have also had a loss of grandchildren that they will never have. My parents often wondered, was it something they did that caused? So there's a lot of blame and guilt. It's important to acknowledge and involve the parents. It's important to have the partners involved. So hospitals in the UK are really good at doing that. There's also a charity, MRKH Connect, which is amazing. So there are networks and there's lots of ways of staying connected. Lots of people on Instagram being very vocal about their experiences, supporting each other. Um, yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned briefly causes and your parents being worried. Do we have any idea what the causes are?
That's challenging. We don't know. So, in some instances, there was some thought about it potentially being genetic, but you know, I don't think there's any proof that it is. There's sometimes in families an aunt and uh, a niece who have it, but it's so, so rare. In my family, I haven't had anyone who had problems having children. Everyone was so fertile. Of course, with my sister, we were all very anxious to see if she would have it. And because she was a baby, there was nothing that we could do at the time, and there was no point putting her through an MRI or anything like that because it wouldn't change the outcome. We wouldn't do anything with that information. So when she had her period, it was a big relief for the whole family. So I don't think it's genetic, but what we know is that it's a problem that starts occurring within the 3 to 4 weeks when we're still an embryo, when the Mullerian ducts start developing on each side of the pelvis. So they start growing and they should merge in the middle as the uterus and then grow down to the top to form the top third of the vagina. So we know that it's very early in the embryonic stage that it happens, that it can happen at any stage. So some women will not have a uterus at all. And that is my case. I have these Mullerian ducts remnants in my pelvic area. Other women start growing and fuse partially. So women who have septums or two uteruses, so it's something that can happen also during that stage, but they don't know why it happens.
Finally, I wondered what advice would you have for anyone else who's maybe just got a diagnosis? What would you say to someone?
I would say that it's possible to be happy regardless of the diagnosis. And one of the best advice I got was from my dad at the time, because I remember crying quite a lot in my room and asking, why is this happening to me? And I think that's that question everyone does when they have a challenging diagnosis, why? Um, and my dad only said, it's not up to us to ask why. One day you will understand. And I just trusted that one day everything would make sense. So this diagnosis ended up shaping everything that I do as a nurse. And yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine a different life now. So I do understand. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I think I managed to live a very happy and fulfilling life despite the diagnosis.
Andrea, thank you so much for your honesty and your openness in talking about this. It was really lovely to talk to you and really lovely to hear about your positivity as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.